Hello everyone, in this video we're going to talk about another proof for God's existence, a classical argument I guess really for God's existence, and this is the argument based on morality. The argument based on morality. This argument confuses people because when they hear it they think that essentially it works like this. You have to believe in God to be a good person, which is not really it. So if you're coming to this video and that's what you think I'm about to say, you're way off with what I'm about to say. Okay, I'm about to say something quite different. But morality, essentially, the idea of good and evil, good versus bad, good versus bad, right versus wrong, like it would be good to help somebody on the side of the road who's broken down and they didn't, they needed help changing a spare tire and, or something. And it would be bad to rob a person on the side of the road. Raise your hand if your car's been broken down on the side of the road, you've been robbed. Me. I wasn't there. I was walking to the gas station to see if I could get a tire, and then I come back and somebody's in the process of robbing my car. I'm running. He steals my stuff, so that was it. Bad, he did bad, the guy robbed me, After that, never left my car on the side of the interstate, because there's bad people that steal stuff. But morality, be good, don't be bad, that kind of thing. We'll talk more about the idea of what morality is as we move through the video, but that's the basic gist of it. Right and wrong, good and bad. Okay, and so the question is, morality as an idea, what is the origin? What is the origin of morality? How does it originate? Where does it come from? Okay? Now, with teenagers, this is very common for teenagers. They say that morality is subjective, and then the alternative to subjective would be that it's objective. So teenagers tend to use this term as though they're very familiar with it. I don't know if they necessarily are always. Subjective morality is the idea that people made it up, and humans made it up, and maybe you didn't make it up personally, I didn't make it up personally, but I was taught it, and you were taught it by somebody who was taught it by somebody, and but it goes back to, at some point, each society made up their own morality. So it's basically the idea that morality is imaginary. Really, that's what subjective morality is that people just kind of dreamed up, hey, don't do that, hey, do that, hey, that is wrong to do, hey, that is right to do. That's the idea, that people just kind of imagined it, so that it's like the Loch Ness Monster. Okay, it's just something that exists in people's minds. So this is one of the first questions we have to take a look at, the idea of subjective versus objective morality. But there's a third option that sometimes teenagers, they never take, but it's one that atheists prefer, in my personal experience. It's evolved. And you say, well, what's the difference between subjective, objective, and evolved? So objective would mean that basically moral values and stuff are real. That so for example, subjective morality would say that let's take for example World War II, classic example. In World War II, the Nazis believed that their race should rule the earth, and they wanted to exterminate certain races, or at least make them slaves, enslave or exterminate all other races on this planet. So what if the Nazis had won World War II and succeeded in either brainwashing or exterminating everyone who disagreed with them? Well, under objective morality, the Nazis would still be evil. They would be objectively evil regardless of what anyone thinks. That morality has a reality beyond the imaginations of humans. There's a real reality to it, and it doesn't matter what anyone thinks. Okay, imaginary or subjective morality would say, well, if the Nazis had done that, then there would be nothing wrong with it, because there is no right and wrong beyond what people think. So, like, if everyone in the world thought that, then that would be okay, because there is no real reality of morals or right and wrong that goes beyond the thoughts of humans. Okay. Now, evolved morality is a bit different. So it's sort of, it has an objective reality. It's not something that people dreamed up, but it's also not something that, it's neither subjective nor objective. It would be basically amoral. So it's the idea that, you know, let's put it to you this way, humans just evolved in such a way so that, in other words, like, it's just like been wired into your brain chemistry and the way that your physical brain thinks. You just can't help but think that, you know, it's wrong to kill a baby, you know. So it's just evolved into your brain. So, and it's just, you've just been built that way, essentially. So it's the idea that people are like machines. And we'll talk more about that as we go. But evolved morality is essentially the idea that you are like a computer or a machine, and you have just, it's just built into the way you are, that you're just going to think certain things are wrong and certain things are right. And it's objective in one sense because it's not something that's purely imagined by you, but it's not really objectively real. So it's like, it emerges without a person. There's no person behind it, or no one dreamed it up, no one thought it up. It's just something that's just like, just sort of happened. So let's talk about that, because in reality, morality, if we, you know, people have these different categories where they think about people. As soon as I bring up a moral argument for God's existence, people say it's subjective, or they say it evolved. You know, and that kind of confuses things. But what we're really talking about is, did the idea of morality, did it originate from somebody? Or did it originate from something? Does it have an origin, you know, somebody or something? Does it have an origin? Does it originate in the choices and in the thoughts and the desires of some sort of personal being, whether it be you, me, the devil, an angel, God, aliens on another planet, but some kind of desires and choices and thoughts of someone? Or does it originate without any personal choice involved in it? You know, so does it have a personal or an impersonal, you know, essentially, origin? So let's take a look at the impersonal origin idea. Now, this is something that a lot of people defend, and so one of the ways, this is actually a pretty complicated concept. So we're, you know, you could formulate it different ways. So for example, let's just go back to the history. Let's just go back to the ancient Greeks and to a guy by the name of Epicurus, and he came up with something that he called evolution. And his theory of evolution is not like the one today, but in some ways, in some basic sort of fundamental logical ways, it is very similar. But he proposed, he was a philosopher who lived, you know, like, what, like 500 or 300 BC, somewhere in there. I don't know exactly when Epicurus lived. But classical Greece. Epicurus, he proposed that there were these little particles he called atoms. Now we've picked up that word atom and applied it to something that we've actually been able to observe today with a microscope. But he just said there's these little particles called atoms, and originally that's all there was, just atoms everywhere. And then they went through a process that he called the swerve, which was unclear. It was kind of a mysterious process that he called the swerve. And then they became all living things. Even gods, under Epicurus' view. The gods exist, but they were originated through these atom swerves. And he called this whole thing is called evolution. Okay, so essentially it's the idea that at the core there's just objects. So if we can think about this, I'll just draw a little atom. So here is, for example, a hydrogen atom. A hydrogen atom. If we zoom into the hydrogen atom, then at the center is a proton, and then around it is the electron cloud, because now we're fairly certain that electrons are not particles. And the electron cloud would have a -1 charge, and the proton in the middle would have a +1 charge. There may be a neutron or two, who knows, neutrons with it. And then in general, if you zoom back out, because of that internal nature of a hydrogen atom, they generally are going to have a +1 charge, because the internal electron cloud prefers to have a second electron with it. And so what the hydrogen atoms will do is you'll have one proton over here, one proton over here, and then the electron clouds will kind of merge so that they can share their electrons. Because it just kind of, it's the inherent, what I'm talking about is hydrogen atoms have these inherent physical properties where they want to like share their electrons. So the electron goes and it goes to that one, and it goes to that one, and it goes to that one. And it just has those inherent properties. And then sometimes, different things combine, so you might have two hydrogen atoms that combine with a larger oxygen atom, because those two hydrogen atoms will have this combination where they share their electron with. Sometimes they might want to prefer to send their electron over to the oxygen atom, which has too many protons and would like some more electrons. So you get the idea. Different physical objects have internal properties that make them sort of do certain things. So like, let's see. There's so many examples. So here's an example. This is a banana that is, what happened? It's not yellow anymore. It's gotten kind of brown and black and that sort of thing. Well, the banana is aging. Is it aging because it chooses to age? Well, no. The chemicals in it have certain properties that react with other. There's microorganisms, like it's rotting on its own. How is it doing that? So there's this basic concept of physical objects have properties that make them do things, and that's really the kind of the concept I'm trying to get across to you. Here's another example. This is dish soap. Dish soap has certain properties so that, like, if I have a nasty plate or something, this will cause, and I put the nasty plate in water and mix this in the water, then the nastiness, whatever grime or whatever's on that plate, will be more likely to go into a chemical combination, it's called a solution, with the water, and then I can just rinse it all off. You agitate it by washing. Soap helps chemically attract the dirt or whatever it is on the plate to the water, and then the water washes away. Or you can take, for example, water in and of itself. Water has certain properties. So if this cup right here was full of water and I did like that, there's no water in this cup, but if I did like that, then the water would go that way. Water has certain properties so that it's always trying to fall down. It modifies its shape so that it fits in the container. You know, so you could have a container that's shaped like that, and the water is going to sit in there and conform to the shape of the weird shaped container. So essentially, if you recognize that different physical objects have different physical properties, then that's what Epicurus was onto. Well, in modern times, people have taken his idea and kind of worked with it. We've learned more about the physical world, and no one talks about the concept of swerve anymore, but they do talk about the concept of what's something called abiogenesis. And then you've got what we call evolution today. And abiogenesis plus evolution. So what is abiogenesis? Well, essentially, the idea is, hey, you know, different chemical compounds just happen to form sometimes. So it's only natural that, you know, iron will bond with oxygen. I think it's FeO2. I can't remember. That's iron oxide, but iron will bond. I can't remember the chemical formula for iron oxide, but iron will just bond with oxygen and will form that compound. Well, the compounds in your body are essentially like everything that your body is made of is essentially these things called proteins. Everything that you're built out of, your bones, your eyeballs, your brains, your heart, your lungs, your organs, your muscles, your skin, all of that are made out of proteins, which are just, they're like you know, they're like H2O or iron oxide. They're just really complicated chemical versions of that. Like if you really complicated chemical compounds. All of the proteins essentially are some different combination of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen combined in some kind of crazy complicated way. And in fact, the proteins are built out of complicated things called amino acids, which means that they have a charge. Okay. Well, the idea is, all right, what if hundreds of millions of years ago on this planet, it just so happened that some kind of one of these, like a really simplistic amino acid or something, just happened to form. Like really simplistic. And so you can imagine some sort of molecular compound, you know, that like these are like little atoms bonded together to form some sort of, because they're like super complicated, but some sort of a little cluster of atoms. Just, it's really unlikely that it happened because it's really complicated, but you know, there's atoms everywhere, all over the ancient earth, just so happened to form, and it just so had the chemical properties that when it comes in contact with other chemicals, it'll tend to cause them to, the other chemicals floating in the water or the whatever, it'll cause them to combine and make more of it. So if we call this A, it just so has the chemical properties and it's complicated and weird that it'll just so happen to cause there to be two more A's. It'll cause the chemicals around it to bond into A's too. So it'll reproduce. If that happens, then okay, now we're getting, as soon as that happens, that's called abiogenesis. Okay? Now we don't know if that ever happened. It's kind of hard to tell. People argue back and forth. But it's relevant because some people think that that plus what we're about to talk about is where morality, the idea of right and wrong, comes from. You say, well, how do you go from that to right and wrong? The whole idea of good and evil. Well, what you have to do is, essentially, these little chemical compounds are like machines. So you can have one little A, little amino acid, and it's going to reproduce and make more A's, and they're going to reproduce by coming in contact. They essentially are eating the chemicals around them and reproducing. Of course, they can't eat everything, but if they come in contact with the right types of chemicals, they could eat it basically and just make more of themselves. Well, the thing is, if you have enough generations of this, it's not going to be perfectly exactly the same. You're not always going to have identical little A's being made. There's going to be tiny variations. Every once in a while you might get some kind of tiny variation. because it's not just going to be perfect every time. And you know, most of those variations will probably make it not able to reproduce. But at some point you may have some variation where in the next generation you have all these A's, but there's one B. And suddenly there's a variation that can still reproduce, maybe just a little more complicated. Okay. Well, as soon as you bring that in, you say, given enough generations of this, you could have a lot of variation. If you have hundreds of millions of years of this going on, once it gets started, then basically these are just little machines that could get more complicated over time. And you could build, through this process, over a long enough period of time, you could essentially build something like the human body. Which is basically, if you look physically at your body, it's just a super complicated chemical reaction of different chemicals in your cells, essentially made of really, really complicated chemical proteins. And like, they're reacting and doing the things that they do, and you're like, oh, okay. Like, then your brain could have formed, here's your brain, that way. Well, your brain goes down to the spinal cord and it sends nerves out that go to fire, and when your hand moves this way, your brain sends a signal out through your nerves to make your hand go that way. If your eyes look over here, then they pick up light that comes into your eyeballs. It sends a signal back to the back of your brain that then like does stuff to it, and suddenly you're like, it's like figuring out and using that information. So if something happens over here, your brain is like aware, and so like, let's say you're, you know, somebody's trying to punch you, you're essentially like, the machine of your brain is letting you know someone's trying to punch you, and you could try to block them or punch back, or you're essentially a really complicated robot. Okay? Really complicated computer and the brain that runs this big robot that's you. Alright, so under under all of this, you are a robot. And under this theory, there is no soul in this system that like, there's no soul that like uses your brain like a like it controls your brain and makes your brain do things, but rather just you are your brain. You are just a physical body. And when you die, there's no soul going to heaven. It's just, that's it. That you don't exist anymore because your brain and your body don't exist anymore, because that's all you are. Okay. So, in essence, you would just be a really complicated computer. Alright, so let's see. Let me grab a demonstration. I'm going to hop over the wire. And here I have let me try not to knock over the wire. This is a cell phone. And cell phones are cool nowadays because they're smartphones. And they're essentially really complicated computers. Computer chips are built out of these little things called transistors, which is like a chemical in the middle, and then two other ones, and you have a wire going, another wire, and then that goes to there. If there's voltage going in here, then voltage can pass through there. And so then you could take that and go to the middle of another one. And you could say like, if this one's on, then that one's on. If this one's not on, then that one's not on. And you could set up like all kinds of stuff, and it can just run stuff and do complicated things if you have enough of these. Because a computer chip is really just like millions of these, really in a really microscopic, huge, super complicated network. Alright, so the idea of morality is essentially that humans, through this process that involves no God or no designer, humans have been programmed like a computer to, be good. That morality is essentially like a computer program that's running in your brain. And you are a machine, and you've been programmed with the directives. So like, it's like GPS on your phone. You know, so like you get GPS on your phone, then you can like program it with a destination. You know, you can program it to take you to the White House in Washington, D.C. with the address of the White House. I don't know where that is, but you could program it in there. And let's say you programmed your phone with a destination of going to the White House. It's essentially the idea that morality has evolved is essentially the idea that you, me, all of us are computers, and through this impersonal, godless, personless process, you've been programmed with these goals and objectives. You've been programmed like a computer, okay, with an objective. And we can program computers with an objective. You can program a GPS with an address. And what the computer will do is it's got stored information inside it, like you have in your brain. It can even go online and access other information, other maps. It uses that information, and it uses techniques that are built into how it's wired to come up with a route to take you from where you are to the address you programmed into it. So like, essentially we can program machines with goals. They can access information just like you go to the library, go talk to people, and use stored information in your brain, and then you go out and you'll try to accomplish the goal. Okay? So computers can be programmed with goals. Machines can be programmed with goals. You could be a machine. And morality, the whole idea of right and wrong, could be a goal that you're programmed with. Live the good life. Be a good person. Well, there's some differences with the GPS. It's not exactly the same. Because the GPS is programmed with a goal. You're driving, and let's just say you take a wrong turn. What does the GPS do? Well, it just recalculates and keeps going. It's programmed with an objective. Based on how the computer is wired up and built, it will simply pursue that objective because that's the objective that it's built to do. It will function how it's built to function. It doesn't choose to function that way. There is no choice involved. It is a machine, an electrical machine, a chemical machine, or just like any machine, like the gears in your transmission of your car. They just turn because that's the way they're made. They're going to turn the way they're made. They're not going to choose to turn sometimes and choose not to turn. So the GPS, like the thing is, it doesn't actually care whether or not you ever get to the address. It doesn't care. It just fulfills what it's programmed to do. So like, if you take a wrong turn, it'll just recalculate. You can take a wrong turn from now till forever, it'll just recalculate and just obey objective. It doesn't care. It's a robot. Okay, it's a machine. You know, they can program it with a woman's voice. They can even program it to sound upset at you if you take a lot of wrong turns. But it's not really upset with you. It's just doing what it's built to do. Okay, so that kind of leads us into the point that I want to make a little more clearly now. Alright, so the idea of evolved morality is the idea that humans, without a programmer, have been programmed with a goal of being good. That's what it is. It's the idea that you have been programmed with a goal of being good. Okay, well, that can maybe explain human behavior, like why if you see a baby, you will go and you see a baby about to get hit by a car, you'll try to save the baby, stop the car, run out there, get the baby, something, whatever you have to do. But here's the thing. Programmed with a goal of being good, what is it? What does it mean to be good? You know, because essentially the real question is the idea of morality. I could see how if humans are machines, then their behavior could be programmed into them. But the question is, what does the CPU do with the idea of being good? All right, now, robot, listen to me, and I'm telling you, I want you to make good choices in life and not bad ones. It's like, well, the machine just is going to do what you tell it to do, what you program it to do. It doesn't choose anything, it just operates how it's built. If there are defects in how it's built, then it's just going to run defectively. So what is the idea of morality? What does it mean to be good? Well, let's say that here's your work. This is where you work. And here's the road. And you're on the way to work. And somewhere in the road there is a nail. And you can't see a random nail on the road. And oftentimes, you go to work all the time, you don't hit a random nail, but sometimes it is unavoidable that every once in a while you're going to hit a random nail. You can't be expected to know that that's going to happen or to be prepared for that to happen every time, because it almost never happens, but sometimes it does. And you're late to work because you got a flat tire on the side of the road and you're late to work. And you have to get out and jack up the car, put the spare on. You show up late. I remember one time when I was a teenager, and when I was driving, I showed up late to school because I got a flat tire on the way to school. I would have gotten there in plenty of time, but I had a flat tire. I changed the flat tire. I go to school. I've got the tire dust all over me. And in the office, they give me, "You're late. You're tardy. This is like you did bad." And it's like, I got a flat tire. Like, I wasn't late because I was sitting at home watching TV or because I stayed in bed. I can't help it. It's not my fault. Like, sometimes people just get flat tires. And I think all of us understand that. They're like, if something happens that's not your fault, then you weren't bad. Or on the flip side, let's say that everyone in the world is 3 feet tall, and you are like a normal type height person. So you're like 5'11" or something. And let's say everyone in the world was 3 feet tall, and you just happen to be 5'11". Would you play in the NBA? Yeah, you probably play in the NBA, because you're taller than everyone. You probably dominate. But how proud would you really feel of just the fact that you just so happen to be, almost twice the height of everyone else? Is that something to be really proud of? It would be almost boring, It's like the old idea, what if Superman really existed? Would he play in the Olympics and just win every event every year? That it seems kind of dumb. It's not really anything to be proud of, this great achievement, because, yeah, I'm Superman, I won everything, Who was the first man on the moon? Well, Superman, of course. It's not a great achievement. It's no big deal for him. And so morality, really, when we say being good, what we really mean is making good choices, and really freely. Something where you're in control. So when we say that you've been programmed to be with a goal of being good, what we really mean is you've been programmed with a goal of freely making, how about we write it this way, freely making good choices. Without, because for example, some kids are just forced to go to school and forced to study hard. That's not really the same as some kid who took it upon himself or herself to learn something. I think we all get the idea that if someone just forces you to do the right thing, you shouldn't be all that proud of it. But when you had the opportunity to do the wrong thing and resisted it, that obviously is a moral morally superior thing to do. You know, like, so for example, most people don't rob stores. And the thing is, if you go around robbing stores, you'll get caught. But in the event where you could have totally robbed a store and gotten away with it, but you still don't, then we understand that that person made the moral choice, because they weren't just behaving in their self-interest. And they had total freedom to steal from that store, and there would have been no consequences, but they still didn't do it. Then that's morally better. Okay, so it's the idea of freely making good choices. That's what morality is, if it means anything. And it doesn't even matter if anyone's ever had that idea before. I had it just now. So it exists. So we have to explain, where does it come from? Now we all know that it's been around forever. And so the real question is, since it must exist, at least for the sake of right now it exists, but we all know it existed a long time before right now, where does it come from? Well, if it came from this, you know, we'll call it A and E, abiogenesis and evolution, then essentially we are robots that have been programmed with a goal of freely making good choices. Well, there's a problem with that. Robots don't make choices. In fact, to make a choice means that you're definitely not a robot anymore. You're a free personal being. That's kind of the essence of what it means to not be a robot. To not be a machine means that, you know, you make choices. So, but the thing is, robots don't make choices. They're always just operating how they're built. So like, this phone doesn't choose to do stuff. It just runs based on how its internal circuitry is wired, and then the electrons are put into it in certain arrangements into those circuits, and that essentially is called programming. But the bottom line is, it's built a certain way. It's just going to run how it's built. You know, so your car just runs a certain way because the parts are built a certain way, and they just run a certain way based on how they're built. It's not a good car or a bad car. So the thing is, robots, they're always programmed to do things. Even if they're programmed with a goal, they just operate how they're built. So programming essentially is forcing to pursue a goal. Because I mean, in essence, machines are always forced to do things. They're essentially slaves because they don't make choices. It's not inherent. They're just mechanical objects. They don't, or you know, electrical circuits or chemical machines. They're always forced to do whatever it is they do. They're forced to do that based on whatever process it is made them. Whether a human made them or whether the A&E process made them, they're forced. Okay, so this is where the problem comes in. How can you force a machine to pursue a goal of freely making good choices? It's like, I hate to say this, but this kind of thing pops up. We've seen it more than once. Like, young man and young woman are dating. One of them wants to get married and the other one's not sure about it yet. And so one of them tries to threaten the other one, like, I'll break up with you, or, you know, or in some way, maybe they'll manipulate them some other way to like force the other person to marry him. Okay, I guess you could do that. So like we've all seen it in these movies where like the queen is, you know, or the girl is, the princess is being forced to marry so and so, or it's like, you know, I'll kill your father, or I'll kill the guy you love, or I'll kill your whole family, or I'll kill your pet kitty cat, you know. Okay. You forced her to love you. Well, she didn't really love you. She just did it because she was forced to. So real love would mean that like she freely made the choice without anyone forcing her to do it. That's just what she wanted to do, not because you threatened her or him or whoever or something. So here's the thing. How is it that you force somebody to freely do something? Because forcing someone to do something means that they didn't have a free choice. But you're forcing them to have a free choice. And that seems like it doesn't make a lick of sense. Right? There is 0 sense being made. Okay, so, I mean, you can't force a robot to have a goal of freely making good choices, but that's exactly what the idea of morality is. It's a goal of freely making good choices. But if it comes from the A&E process, then it's a goal we are forced to pursue, because that's in the A&E process, we're robots, and you can only force robots to do things. They don't make choices. And so that's where the idea comes from. But it can't come from that, because you can't force somebody to freely do something. It's logically impossible. It's like if I told you 1 minus 2 equals 37. It's logically impossible. No. It's like if I told you that there are no true statements. There are no true statements. Okay, well, is that statement true? Is it true that there are no true statements? You see the problem? So like, what I'm really saying when I say there are no true statements, what I mean is this statement is true. No statements are true. How can it be a true statement that there are no true statements? Because if it's a true statement that there are no true statements, then there is a true statement, which is that you're affirming the same thing you're denying. This is called the law of non-contradiction. So the bottom line is, this whole idea that the idea of morality came from the process of abiogenesis and evolution. It can't. And that's any sort of, so like if we go back to our 3 options, we've got subjective, we've got objective, and then we've got, we'll just say impersonal. And then these 2 would be personal. Look at that. Alright, so there's two types of personal, and then as far as impersonal goes, whatever impersonal thing you're going to have, it's going to be robots, and then you run into this contradiction. And so it's logically impossible. You can create moral behaviors. You could build robots that like take care of babies. They could be really complicated and see, oh no, baby in danger, go help baby. But they wouldn't have the idea of morality, because the idea of morality is essentially the idea of freely choosing to be good. But robots are always forced to do whatever they do based on how they're built, so they can't be forced to have a goal of freely choosing to be good. So you run into a problem. So boom, this is out. We have eliminated this option. It is no longer on the list. It is impossible. So now let's take a look at all the teenagers' favorite idea. Subjective morality. The idea that morality is subjective. This is the idea that morality is like Bigfoot. It's just something people fantasized up and dreamed of. One of the main ways that teenagers defend it is with slavery, and they say, if you rewind the clock back to, let's just say, 2000 BC, then everybody thought slavery was okay. No, as far as we know, there was no one in 2000 BC that thought there was something wrong with slavery. If you fast forward 4,000 years to 2000 AD, it still goes on this planet, but generally speaking, slavery is generally considered bad by 2000 AD. We're trying to wipe it out. It still exists somewhere. Those people are seen as bad, the few people that still do it. And so what teenagers often tell me is that these societies back then had that moral system that said that slavery was okay, and today they think it's wrong. And they say that's the proof that that morality is just something people dream up, because they dream up totally different things. So how can it be anything other than something people just dream up? Okay. There's some flaws with that reasoning. In 2000 BC, people thought that originally the universe was water, and then the gods created a brass dome, and above there was water. And they said there must be water up above there, because sometimes it falls down in the form of rain, so there must be water up there. And they figured there must be some kind of solid dome that holds the water back. And then down here you had the land, or the earth, and then under there was water. Under the earth there was water, and sometimes the water would come through, and those were called oceans, right? And they thought there was water under the ground, because if you dig, there's water, you find water, so there's wells, you know. So that's what people thought. The earth, and then everywhere is just water, you know, it's just water everywhere. And there's a flat plane under a brass dome. 2000 BC, everybody thought that. Fast forward through history, nobody thinks that. Now, the view is that the earth is floating in a vacuum of space. It has an orbit around a much larger object called the sun, and it's actually a thin eggshell. It's thinner than an eggshell, and inside is lava. Basically super hot iron mostly. Okay, and on the surface there's a thin shell that's in some spots has land, in some spots has water. And we even think today that the earth is so smooth that if it was the size of a pool ball, all of the mountains would be smoother than the smoothest pool ball. That's how big it is. It's not flat under a bronze dome. There's space, there's momentum, you know, there's land, there's lava under, like totally different, totally different, totally different, totally different, totally different. So people in the past believe this flat earth, solid sky thing. And people today believe that the earth orbits the sun and has a molten core of lava. Okay. They call it magma all the time in the books. I don't know the difference, but I'm sure there's a difference. So, according to the teenager logic, which I've heard a jillion times, people in the past thought one thing, people in the back today think something else. So therefore people are just making it all up. Well, no, the earth does exist and would have to have some shape. You can't have no shape. You can be wrong about the shape, and they weren't totally wrong even in the past. There is water up there, but it's not held back by a solid dome. It's held back by the fact that it's in the form of water vapor, and it does fall down. And there is water under the ground, but it's not under the ground everywhere. And the earth is flat as far as you can see, but it has a gentle curve, and it's so big that, like I said, even the biggest mountains, if the earth was shrunk down to the size of a pool ball, then the mountains would be faint little scratches. And it would actually be smoother than the smoothest pool ball. But they weren't totally wrong. You know, there is water under the ground. Like they weren't making this up. And we're not making up this. And so just because people in the past thought one thing and people today think another thing, it doesn't mean that people are just making it up. In other words, people can try their best to come up with a correct answer, but sometimes they're wrong. Okay? So people in the past thought slavery was okay. Over time, we could have gotten a better view of slavery and realized it was wrong, just like we now have a better view, model of what the earth is like. It's possible. Okay? So that doesn't... This argument, you know, it doesn't really prove that morality is subjective. But subjective morality it has a real big problem. Okay, so people can dream up stuff, you know. People dream up all sorts of stuff. People fantasize things and they dream up, you know, all sorts of things. But the idea of imaginary morality is worse. And it goes back to this ancient question that this guy named Socrates asked. And it's called the Euthyphro dilemma. The Euthyphro dilemma. What is the Euthyphro dilemma? The Euthyphro dilemma, you know, can be applied in different ways and different times. He applied it to like Zeus and the gods back then. But in the case of imagining that the case of subjective morality, that people dreamed it up, we can apply it to people. And we could say, all right, did people dream up morality because they thought it was good to do so? Did people dream up morality because they thought it was good to do so? You see, the thing is, dreaming up morality itself is different from like dreaming up Bigfoot or the Loch Ness Monster or the bronze dome over the sky. You know, back in the past, they thought the bronze dome had like doors, and the gods would open up the doors sometime and let water fall through. So people can dream up all sorts of stuff, but dreaming up morality itself is different, because morality itself is essentially the idea that like some things are better than other things. You know, like and this is how do you dream up the idea that some actions are better than others? How do you dream up the idea that some actions are better than others? That it's better to, you know, do this instead of that. It's better to, you know, pay money for what they sell at the store instead of stealing from the store. How do you dream up the very idea that there's such a thing as good and evil, right and wrong? Well, the problem is that creating morality is an action that would be taken by people who don't think that anything is any better or any worse than anything else, because they can't already have dreamed up morality before they dream it up. So how did they dream it up the first time? How did they dream up morality when they didn't think that dreaming anything versus anything else is good or bad? Why did they do it? How did they go about doing it? You know, that's kind of a problem. Like, why did people dream up morality when they didn't think it was good to dream up morality? They didn't think it was bad not to. They didn't think it was bad to do it. They didn't think anything they did was any worse or any better than anything else. Then why do it? So you can see, like, if you are a being that makes choices and not a robot, it becomes impossible for you to make choices without also thinking that it was better to make that choice than to not make that choice. So how do people dream up the very concept that like anything is any better or worse than anything else? And you could say, well, people have preferences, you know, it's not really morality, it's not really good and evil, it's just, you know, personal preferences. Well, that's really mistaken. That's like super flawed. It's because essentially, like, if you have preferences, what you mean is you have moral values. So moral values are distinct from what's also called moral duties. So moral duties are things that we would all agree. So like, do not steal. Whereas moral values might be things that you think are good, but you're not bad if you don't do them. Like, it's good to have fun. But sometimes it's good to work, and sometimes it's good to take a bath, and those are all good to do. But you're not bad if you don't do them necessarily all the time. Whereas stealing, anytime you steal, it's bad to do. Or murder would be a moral duty. It's wrong to murder all. So essentially, the question is, as soon as you have moral values, they're going to develop into moral duties. Because if you say if let's say that if fun is a moral value, then if someone chooses to never have fun or prefers to never have fun, then they're bad. If they say never have fun, because fun does have moral value. Okay, so the problem is as soon as someone thinks that anything is in any way good or something fun to do or preferable, then immediately that's going to lead to the belief that well, I should choose that, and it's better to choose that instead of not choosing that. So you're going to immediately run into this problem. So if we essentially, subjective morality is wrong, impersonal morality is wrong, which leaves us with objective morality. Okay, so we already talked about impersonal morality, but subjective morality, the problem is that you can't. It's another logical problem. You can't want to do something that you don't want to do. You can't think it's good to. In other words, when people created the idea of not stealing, did they think it was good not to steal? Well, they're in the process of creating the idea that it's good not to steal, so they can't think it's good not to steal. So then why did they create the idea that it's good not to steal if they didn't think it was good not to steal? Okay, so you get the idea. Subjective morality runs into a lot of problems like that. It also runs into other problems of you would say that the Nazis aren't bad, and murderers aren't bad. So extreme examples I'll put it to you like this. Ravi Zacharias, who just passed away actually, he always told this story of a young woman that he talked to, and she was a social worker, I think in Thailand. And she said there was this bad part of the city where men would drink. It was called Snake Alley, and men would drink a mixture of snake's blood and hard liquor, and then go and do depraved things. And she said that she had to tear a 6-month-old baby girl out of the arms of a man that was raping the baby. Okay? If you believe that morality is subjective, then you would say that there is no reality to the view that what that man was doing was wrong. It's just, you just dreamed that up. It's the idea that what he's doing is wrong is imaginary. So that's pretty extreme place you have to go to. Okay, now if you say that if it's impersonal, you run into logical problems, so these can't be correct anyway. But beyond that, they just seem horrific things to have to say. And it's amazing the lengths people have to go to avoid the existence of God. But if you say that morality is, it originated through this A&E process, or something like that, some kind of, that we're robots, then you would still say that, the process of evolution could have programmed us in a different way, and then we would think totally different things are morally correct. So, for example, if we had evolved more similar to bees, then female bees, when there's two queens, they'll kill each other and eat one another. So do you want women to do that? Do you want women who, essentially in a bee colony, the queens are the only ones that can have babies. And so when there's more than one queen that can have babies, they will fight each other to death and eat the other one. So do you want that? Do you want human women to fight each other to the death because they both have the ability to have babies? Or do you think there's nothing wrong with that if we had just happened to evolve from bees? Look how the absurd lengths that you're going to. Because there would be no objective reality to morality if we didn't evolve in the right way. We just happened to evolve this way. We could have evolved in another way. There's nothing any better or any worse than any other process. Also, there's the logical problem, so they can't be true. Now, then we get to objective morality. And so, objective morality runs to this issue of like, okay, well, humans can't dream up morality. It can't emerge impersonally. But if it can't emerge impersonally, then it has to emerge from a person, right? But that person can't just dream it up, because we ran into the problem if humans just dreamed it up. And so this is the other issue of the Euthyphro dilemma. And this is what Socrates said, where does God come up with morality? Because if God is a personal being, then, if we say God just dreamed up morals, and they're like beneath God like that, then we run into a problem, because that's the same problem we ran into with people dreaming it up. And that's what Socrates was saying. He's saying anybody that just dreams up morality doesn't make sense. Okay, well, you could alternatively say that the morality is above God, and God didn't dream it up, but God had to command us to, do certain things because they're right. Not because God just made them right, but because they're right whether God likes it or not. Well, that can work for people. People can bow down to a higher moral system, but God can't bow down to a higher moral system, because the problem is that would mean that God is, just a person like us, and then whatever that higher source would have to be God. So you run into this problem. So that's the Euthyphro dilemma. Whichever way you go with it, it doesn't work. And the subjective morality doesn't work. The impersonal morality doesn't work. Even God, it still doesn't work. So all of the options, it's like we're out of options. There's one option left. And the final option is that God's nature is goodness. So that morality isn't something that God just made up. It wasn't like God was sitting in heaven with a dice and he's saying, all right, what am I going to put the next commandment in the Bible? Love your neighbor, eat your neighbor. What's it going to be? Love your neighbor. Okay, who knows? It could have been eat your neighbor. It's like, no, that doesn't really make sense. The morality doesn't seem arbitrary like that. But at the same time, it can't be higher than God. And so the only option we've removed, we've shown that every option is impossible. This is the only one left, is that it's intrinsic to who God is. That it's intrinsic to God's nature. It's not above God, it's not below God. It is God. That it's just what God is. Okay, that God's nature is goodness itself. That's the only option left. Okay, which means that morality, that gives us all sorts of, there's all sorts of conclusions, like since that must be true, then that means that all concepts of good and evil, the idea of morality, of good, originates there. It also means that because humans were always, if you had a perfect understanding of who God is, then you would essentially be God. You would know everything God knows. Then God doesn't know anything you don't know, then you're God, basically. So, since God is always going to be beyond us, if He's really going to be God and you're really going to not be God, then humans would always have an imperfect understanding. Humans would always have an imperfect understanding of morality. It would never be complete. There would always be something more we could learn about good and evil. Okay? Which means that in essence, we're never perfect. Okay? Well then, if the basic idea of morality must originate in God, but our understanding of the specifics must always be imperfect, that opens up the possibility of moral progress. That humans could, over time, gain a better and better and better and better and better understanding of morality. Never getting there, but always doing better. Potentially forever. So that people in 2000 BC saw no problem with slavery. Slowly over time, things started to change until eventually humanity comes to have a better understanding of morality, which is really a better understanding of God, so that there's moral progress. Okay? But one of the most interesting points of this is because of the logical eliminations we've made, there must exist a moral lawgiver. And it's really quite simple. Good and evil exists only if God exists. Good and evil exists, therefore God exists. Okay, 1, 2, 3. So essentially, this is kind of the overall structure of what we've been talking about. The whole goal of freely choosing to be good can only exist if God exists. Since we know that the idea of good and evil must exist, then therefore God exists. It's not so much the idea of good and evil cannot originate in any other way, so it can only exist if God exists, so therefore God exists. Sometimes you run into people who say that, like, well, what's the point of talking about this stuff? Well, there's a lot of reasons. For one, so why talk about proofs for God's existence? It's a spiritual discipline. It's a spiritual discipline for Christians. The book of 2 Peter lists out 7 spiritual disciplines that we are supposed to do, and as we do them, God will work through us to transform your soul so that you'll become a better person. It'll be easier for you to do the right thing. And those are things like, praying, trying your best to obey God's commandments, encouraging one another. But he also says the gaining of knowledge is one of those things. Peter also tells us in 1 Peter 3:15 that being prepared to give a logical explanation for why you believe what you believe about Jesus is something, he says, he doesn't say go around arguing with people. He says always be prepared to do that. In other words, it's like physical fitness. It's like stay in shape. It's a spiritual discipline. So learning proofs for God's existence or defenses of what you believe as a Christian is a spiritual discipline. It's not something you do all the time, all the day, every day, but it's just healthy. It's healthy it's good for the soul, to talk about it every once in a while. So it's a spiritual discipline for Christians. Number 2, some people are converted by it. Some people are convert by this. So a lot of times people will tell you that nobody gets converted through proofs for God's existence to believing in God. They're dead wrong. There just are people that do that. That's it totally happens all the time. It's not a lot of people. It's kind of like if you were, let's say that you were sent as a missionary to Taiwan. And you're going off as a missionary to Taiwan, and to reach the people in Taiwan, you have to get on an airplane and learn to speak the language and go there. And I guess Chinese is what they speak there. I don't know. The only way you'll convert people in Taiwan is by going to Taiwan or doing some sort of ministry to reach out to them. But then here comes somebody who tells you, you're not going to convert many people that way. who really are you going to convert? That's a bunch of work. You shouldn't bother. It's like, well, I will convert some people. There's a certain small group of people that will be converted that way. It's like, yeah, but it's really expensive and difficult. It's like, that's the only way to reach them. There are some people that, apologetics is kind of what we're doing here, a defense of the faith. That's just the way to convert them. It's people like, people who work in science, engineers, doctors. They tend to be converted through this type of stuff. So they're not on an island somewhere. They're kind of spread out through every society. The thing about it is, if you can convert one of those people, they tend to be effective at converting others. So like, yeah, you're only going to convert a small amount of people with your proofs for God's existence, but the people that you convert, a lot of times they'll be really effective at converting lots of other people. So it's not a bad ministry to be involved with, because it can have a lot of effect in the long run. For example, C.S. Lewis was converted through this type of stuff. And in fact, this argument was one of his big arguments for him that really led him to faith. And I mean, the impact that one person had is phenomenal. Okay, now there's another point. The one group of people, especially who will ask for proof of God's existence, will be atheists. They a lot of times will ask for proofs for God's existence. And what you can do is go through a proof like this, and they'll have objections to it. You hash it out, you debate it, and you show them that their objections don't work, and you actually have succeeded in proving God's existence. What will happen then? They'll probably, unless they're this type of person, but they could be this type of person, but if they're a normal person, they'll probably get mad. And the thing is, most normal people, what they believe, whether they're atheists or Christians, what they believe is more about community. It's about their family and their friends and the important people in their lives. And so when they're atheists because their community's atheist. Just like a lot of people who are Christian, it's because the important people in their lives are Christian, and they respect those people, they admire those people, they listen to those people, so they believe what those people believe. That's how most people operate. Most people are not like this number 2 category. Most people are more community oriented. This number 2 category, these people have bad social skills. But they can be effective at converting people. Yeah, it's just their lot in life. Okay. But most people are more socially oriented, including atheists, including everyone. Buddhists, whatever. They'll be converted through their community. But what they do is they kind of build a fort. So it's like, all right, and it's a fort of arguments built around the internal core of what they really believe. Inside there, it's all about community, and it's a dearly held, deeply personal belief. But they put out arguments as sort of a barrier. And so what can happen is you break down the barrier of their arguments and you give them proof. Then what will happen is in the future, they'll get mad once you debunk and you prove that God must exist. They're not going to convert, but they might be more open to making friends with Christians or with people that believe in God in general, because they'll realize these people aren't stupid. Because they probably convince themselves that anyone who believes in God is an idiot, is a moron, is really dumb. Once you show them that you're not really dumb, they'll get mad. But in the long run, when you're gone, they'll be more open to making friends with somebody that believes in God, because it's like they know in the back of their mind that it's not dumb to believe in God because you showed them. And so then what happens is they say, okay, well now they've got Christian friends, which can be, in the long run, a new community. And as those Christians show them love and respect and actually follow what Christ taught, they'll realize like, hey, these are good people. This whole Christianity thing's a good thing. And then they may realize like, there's something to this. I should really take this seriously. And then they finally might say, hey, I'm going to believe it. And then after they believe it, a lot of times they begin to realize more and more how true it always was. Okay, so these arguments for God's existence are not a waste of time. And this is the final video in this little series that I've done. This is the third video, and at the end of it, we're going to come in and kind of explain why we're doing it. But hopefully, you've enjoyed this little marker board series that hopefully anyone can understand. And we've gone through 3 proofs for God's existence. And so, you know, a lot of people say that, you know, religion is something you just take on faith. That's obviously not true if you can prove God's existence. But I think a lot of people, it's more about the community. But at the very end, what I want you to do is know that you have proof. Especially those of you who are Christians. I want you to know that like this phone, or how about like this? I'll give you an example. Let's see what I've got in this wallet. Is there any cash? There's no cash in this wallet. There's no cash in my wallet right now. But let's say that I had some cash. You ever had a lot of cash in your wallet? It's kind of nice to know that like something goes wrong, I need some money for something. In my back pocket, I've got a couple $100 bills or something like that. It's very comforting. And I want you to think of these proofs for God's existence not as something that makes you feel upset, that you don't understand them correctly. It's okay if you don't fully understand them. But I want them to be comforting, the comforting thing in your back pocket. That you know that like, you know what? I'm not dumb at all. I'm actually right. I don't have to be a jerk about it. I don't have to be rude. You know, because 1 Peter 3:15 says this: always be prepared to give a defense to everyone who asks you for the reason that you have hope. He says, but do so with gentleness and respect, keeping a clear conscience, so that those who speak maliciously against your good behavior in Christ will be ashamed of their slander of you. So, gentleness and respect. Which is not easy, because if you don't disagree with someone and you just let them go with whatever they want to say, that's not very respectful. But if you, that's very gentle but not respectful. But you can also come down hard on everyone and not be very gentle, but be really respectful in a way. So it's not easy to be both gentle and respectful. But it's important. I want everyone to know this stuff so that they don't have to feel stupid for being a Christian. If I could achieve anything, I want people who are Christians to not feel stupid, because they're not. So that's why. Anyway, hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for your time.